Guys, welcome back. So, as always, I like to start with a massive thank you to everyone who has liked, shared, and subscribed. I'm not able to do this without you, and I'm happy that you are enjoying the content that I'm posting. So, today I'm going to be talking about something a little bit different. So, we're all aware of the terminology of stans, which is, as far as I'm aware, like stalker obsessed fan. Um, it's bandied around a lot in various fandoms. So if you follow particular celebrities and whatnot on the internet, like Twitter, or X as it's now known, or Instagram, there's always a comment saying, "Oh, I stand this person," and I think we all, majority of us, or even all of us, we remember the Eminem song "Stan" and the music video, but this story today is what happens when toxic fandom takes over someone's life and it ends up with major consequences. There are some really infamous stories of fans that have murdered their particular idol or someone that they followed or attempted to kidnap them. Uh, I kind of chose this one on a little bit of bias. So I am going to be talking about Ricardo Lopez. So for those of you who don't know, he was a massive fan of Bjork in the 90s and he attempted to murder her. And so obviously, like I said, it's a little bit of bias because Bjork happens to be one of my favourite artists as well. Um, so without further ado, we're just going to get into the story of Ricardo Lopez. So, who was Ricardo? So he was born on January 14th, 1975 in Montevideo. That's in Uruguay, so a South American country. And he was born into a very middle class family. Eventually, some point during his teenage years or early childhood, couldn't really find out an exact date, but they ended up moving to Lawrenceville in Georgia. So they moved north into North America, and he was said to have had a really close relationship with his family. And they said that he was really easygoing growing up, but he was also incredibly introverted. Ricardo had very few close friends, but he never ever had a girlfriend. Something that was pointed out, and it's something that he talks about quite a lot, as I'm going to discuss as the video goes on. So all of the friends that he did have all happened to be male. He had no female friends, and no relationships whatsoever. So in the diary, he said, so he would write everything all in his diary that he was keeping, and in this particular diary, he would speak about feelings of shame and felt inadequate. He said that he felt really awkward around women due to having gynecomastia. So for those of you who don't know, gynecomastia is a condition that men have where it gives you extra breast tissue. And I think it's what we would commonly refer to as moobs. He also had Klinefelter syndrome, which was diagnosed fairly early on in his life. So, Klinefelter syndrome is a genetical condition where the recipient has an extra X chromosome, and this results in very small and poorly functioning testicles. Some cases, so it is like varying different reports that I could find. Some cases it can lead to micropenis. So Obviously, going back to the X chromosome thing, so obviously we all know that men have an X and Y chromosome, women have two X's. Um, Klinefelter syndrome obviously affects men and gives them XXY. So Ricardo, growing up, he had aspirations to become a famous artist, but he then ended up dropping out of school age 16 in 1991. So obviously in America, I think, I don't know about now, but I know at that particular time, you stayed on in education until you were about 18. Whereas obviously in the UK, 16 would be the age that you leave school. But due to his fear of being inadequate, he ended up working for his brother's pest control business instead. And this was his way of making money rather than applying to art school because he just felt like he wouldn't be accepted. So age 1992, sorry, in 1992, age 17, I do apologise, Ricardo had become a recluse, so completely shutting himself away from anyone in the outside world. The only contact he had at this point was a little bit with his family, and obviously anyone who he was working with at the time. Other than that, he just completely shut himself away from his friends. And using during his time as a recluse, he would escape into a world of fantasy, and he was looking up to a lot of different celebrities as his inspiration. And this became a lot more worse when Ricardo soon moved into his own apartment in Florida. No, sorry, not Florida, Hollywood. Do apologise, guys. I read the wrong part of my script. So obviously, yeah, he moves into a Hollywood apartment. I think obviously going on to know more about Ricardo, I think obviously going to Hollywood, prime location to bump into various different celebrities, and B, obviously he wouldn't be interrupted with the life that he has so far chosen to lead. So it was at this point that he begins a fascination with the actress Gina Davis, following news articles on her, keeping clippings of any article that she was involved in. And this sort of soon fizzled out when he found out that she was in a relationship with her bodyguard, Gavin DeBecker. So I think at one point she was married to Jeff Goldblum, and that marriage broke down. She ended up in a relationship with her bodyguard, and this was seen as unacceptable to Ricardo. So, in his idea, his perfect celebrity or the person that he looked up to was not, as in his eyes, they weren't human. They were something higher than a human. And that's another thing that he talks about a little bit more in his diary, and something that we're going to come on to. So he lost interest in Gina, and then he first developed an interest in Bjork in 1993. So he became aware of Bjork at that time when she released her album debut. And he heard the album while he was visiting a friend's house. And at first he said that he found her music to be really weird and experimental. And don't get me wrong, it can be, especially her later albums, her more recent albums. But I think you have to kind of be into that avant-garde sort of thing to appreciate what she actually does. But if you're more into commercial sounds that you hear on the radio, you're not gonna really understand or even like what Bjork does now. I digress. Back in the day, especially with obviously her first album debut and then the follow-up post, she was a bit more commercial. which is why she was getting the charting singles. Obviously, as she got more experimental, the less her music was charting. So over time, this crush that he had on Bjork, it became more of an obsession, and he began detailing this obsession of Bjork in a diary that he was keeping, and he would use this diary to write down information about her life, and would write about her number, hundreds and hundreds of fan letters, citing her as his muse. Said his infatuation gave him a euphoric feeling, and soon over, within a matter of months, this obsession took over Ricardo's life, and he became more and more disconnected from the outside world. So he wrote about a longing for Bjork's acceptance, said that he wanted to be the person who had an effect on her the most. He detailed about inventing a time machine to travel back to the 1970s so he could befriend her as a child. And in his words, these fantasies were not sexual, because he wrote, I couldn't have sex with Bjork because I love her. And this diary amassed to about over 800 pages about his thoughts and feelings about Bjork, and how he felt he was inadequate because he was overweight. He was disgusted that he had gynecomastia, and obviously the deep shame about his Klinefelter syndrome. And this gave him an inability to have a girlfriend. And he said that he was a loser who hadn't learned how to drive. He complained about having a menial job as an exterminator, and this job particularly gave him very little money. So this diary contained 168 references to Ricardo's feelings of failure, 34 references to suicide, 14 references to murder, 52 references to celebrities, and 408 references to Bjork. So you can see that obviously, yeah, this whole fascination about her has taken over his entire life, and she's something that he can only think of, the only thing that he thinks about throughout his day. So it comes to early 1996, and Ricardo was upset to learn that Bjork had been in a relationship with the musician Tricky. So, for those of you who grew up in the 90s, you'd be aware of who Tricky is. He was a member of a trip hop band called Massive Attack. And when that relationship broke down, she got into a relationship with a music producer and a DJ called Goldie. Again, if you were growing up in the 90s, you'd be aware of who Goldie is. So this was really unacceptable to Ricardo, as he didn't approve of interracial relationships, and he had a lot of racist and negative views on black men. So he was angry that she had apparently betrayed him, and that she had been in relationships with black men. And he wrote, I've wasted 8 months of my life and she has a fucking lover. So Ricardo then began fantasizing about how he could punish Bjork. And Ricardo then gave up a diary, and he instead began recording a video diary. And in total, he recorded about 20 tapes. Each of these tapes were about 2 hours long. And according to Ricardo, the purpose of these videos was to document his life, his art, and his plans. And he said that comfort is what I seek in speaking to you. So to stop here for a moment, obviously we touched upon the fact that Ricardo was sending a lot of fan mail to Bjork at this point. Now, obviously, we're never going to know what was in those letters, and if you think about the time frame of when this was happening, so in February 1996, I think you will all remember the footage of Bjork touching down in a Thailand airport, and the reporter goes to speak to her, and Bjork attacks her. What Bjork was saying about that was that she requested that the press wouldn't be at the airport, and she was going to call a press conference the next day. And the particular reporter that come up to her first approached Bjork's son, Sindri, who was only 10 years old at the time, and Bjork just reacted in a protective mode. If what I'm, like I said, obviously I could be wrong about this. That reaction could be nothing to do with the fan mail that she was receiving from Ricardo, but if I am right, then you can kind of half understand. Obviously, violence is never ever the solution to anything, but you can sort of understand that kind of reaction that she would have had. So it's just obviously her mothering instinct kicking in. She doesn't want a stranger approaching her child, especially if she's sort of in fear at this point that she potentially has a stalker, because she doesn't know where these letters are coming from. So these tapes that Ricardo was making, they included details of his revenge and discussed his crush that ended in an obsession, and his anger over Bjork's engagement to Goldie, which led to him deciding to want to kill her. Um, One video, Ricardo says, "I'm just going to have to kill her. I'm going to send her a package and I'm going to send her to hell." And these tapes, they began in January 1996. So at this time, vlogging wasn't really a popular concept. Not as much as it is today. And if you watch the footage like I have, or I'll watch some of the footage because it is really, really uncomfortable viewing this footage. But you see how uncomfortable he is on camera. He just starts basically by detailing his life, who he is, and talks about his obsession with Bjork. But he knew that it was only him who was going to view this. And obviously, if his plans all went together in the end, the FBI would be viewing it. So Ricardo then begins pulling like really, really strange faces at the camera and saying, "This is who I am. This is me." So as the videos progress, Ricardo's disturbed state of mind, it becomes a lot more evident. So he then holds up a tour poster of Bjork and says, "Look at this sweet, innocent, cute, shy little thing. Well, she's only gone on to fuck an N-word." Obviously, I can't say that word on YouTube. I will be taken down, but that is obviously the major focal turning point in Ricardo apparently wanting his revenge on Bjork, is the fact that obviously Goldie happened to be black. That is it. That is his only reason for this. So he talks about her previous relationship with Tricky and how, in his eyes, this is really unacceptable to him. And he then begins detailing his plan for revenge by sending a package to a London address. So obviously, Bjork at this particular time of her life was living in somewhere in South London. He said he'd been working for about a week and a half on setting up a booby trap. He was going to construct a lightweight package wrapped up in orange velvet. And on the sides of these packages were buttons that would have to be pressed at the same time. And once she had pressed these two buttons, two hypodermic needles containing HIV infected blood would obviously stab her and infect her. So obviously, I have to point out that it's really unclear, and he doesn't specify whose blood this would be. Because as I've already said, and as he's already said, he has never been in a relationship at this point. So you can assume that Ricardo at this point had never had sex, and it wasn't known for him to be an intravenous drug user. He then details upon hearing the news that Bjork was infected that he would uh, end up being a media frenzy. He would then commit suicide to avoid jail. So, 17th January 1996, Ricardo starts to show equipment that he has bought to begin building the contraption. He details all the fabrications about himself to deceive the FBI, and then shows how he's attained Bjork's address in London. So this at the time, I don't know if this site is still running. I couldn't find the details, but he basically paid a subscription fee, sorry, through a website, and this fee was about $30. And in return, he gets the addresses, he gets the birth dates, and he gets the death certificates of thousands and thousands of celebrities. He then goes on to a view of his house. He labels himself as a dirty pig. And obviously, if you see in the images of the video, the house is in a really unkept state. And then in one part of the video, he focuses on a bust that he's making of Bjork. So in some tapes, he goes on about not wanting to disappoint his mother. He talks about Bjork being a god. So many stalkers, like Ricardo, who stalk celebrities, as I said, obviously they don't see them as human, but as objects that they want to possess, or objects that they want to look up to. So in a video dated the 21st of January, he talks about his Klinefelter syndrome, then goes on about religion, detailing why he left his organised religion, but he still believed that he would end up dying in Armageddon. He talks about the death penalty in Florida, commenting that he would commit genocide against the police, and that the only two people that keep him grounded in reality are his mother and Bjork. He then details his racist beliefs. He starts talking about committing a terrorist attack in a rap concert, because in someone like Ricardo, he has that stereotype that it's only black people that listen to rap music or hip hop music, and obviously it's not true, but in his head he has that negative stereotype. So his next few tapes, he rambles on about just nothing in particular, and in one dated on the 27th of January 96, he says that what he's doing is a choice, and he reiterates that it's a pleasure that he wants to indulge in. So the next few tapes from the remainder of January were really, really heavily damaged, and it wasn't clear who or why, who had damaged them, why they were damaged. But obviously the FBI had these tapes in their possession for quite a long time. So what could be made out from the damaged tapes was Ricardo just spewing on about more racist beliefs. He then says that he sees Bjork as a little girl, and he thinks of himself as her father, which is really, really weird. So Ricardo then stops vlogging for around a month or over a month, and the next one is dated on the 3rd of March 96. And he talks about his parents' concerns for him. Said that he's been in touch with his parents and they're really worried about his mental state. They're asking him if he has any firearms, any guns in the flat. He then states for that his plans for Bjork are on hold, as he needs to concentrate on his mother. And then there's another big gap between his recording, so he picks up again in April '96. Again, just talking about nothing, and then spewing more racist ideology. And it then jumps to a 3 month time span, picking up in July '96, where he doesn't really talk much and is really, really incoherent with his speech. Um, so what could be made out was that he said that he had quit his job so that he could focus on his plans for Bjork. And he then begins to detail that he's changed his ideas from the HIV trap, as he says, I've changed from the AIDS thing, as I don't have AIDS, not that I know of. And so, well, yeah, like that's kind of obvious, but if he did talk about the where he was going to get this blood from, I haven't seen it. Like I said, I've only watched small snippets of details of the videos, just to get a general idea, because, like I said, it is really, really uncomfortable viewing. So he then details how by hollowing out a book he can disguise a spray bomb using hydrochloric acid. And a letter attached to the book would state that these are scripts from an upcoming movie that Bjork was to be a part of. In the next few tapes, Ricardo then films himself making the bomb. He makes a call to someone to order the hydrochloric acid, but at some point he then finds out that obviously hydrochloric acid is not corrosive enough to disfigure someone. So he then switches his plans again to use sulfuric acid. And then once he gets hold of this acid, he then demonstrates how the bomb will work. So he opens the book, and this will cause the acid to trip out of what looks like a deodorant can. So he sprays, and it looks like it sprays like a deodorant. And the idea is obviously as soon as she opens the book, it will spray into her face. So on the 29th of July '96, Ricardo shows a package dated for the 13th and talks about a gun that he has purchased, which is a 38 point caliber revolver. He then gives another test of the bomb using a piece of cardboard. And on this cardboard, there's a drawn picture of Bjork. And he doesn't add the acid in the demo, as there's a shot of Ricardo talking to the camera, and he has specks of whatever substance he used on his face. So the 1st of August '96, this video shows Ricardo playing with the gun, and throughout August, Ricardo continues filming himself putting the project together. He talks about his plans for his suicide, and he then says that his main mission isn't to fuck up York, but to end his life. And he adds that it's not fair on his family to suffer if Bjork isn't suffering. So the next few tapes, Ricardo discusses ideas on how to send a package to Bjork, and he says that he can't use the postal office thanks to what he believed was terrorists who blew up a plane. So he's making a reference to the Transworld Airline Flight 800 that exploded midair on July the 17th, 1996. And it was speculated at the time that it was a terrorist attack, but eventually it was found out just to be down to an equipment failure about 4 years later in 2000. Ricardo then decides to go back to the post office with the gun, and he puts this in quotation marks just in case. So you can imagine, obviously, he's taking the gun to threaten the staff to have this package sent out, even though it's highly, highly unlikely that the package would have made its way, but somehow he managed to do it. So Ricardo's final tape begins on the 12th of September 96. He puts the film in finishing touches to the project, and he then eventually goes to get the package. He comes back at around 10 a.m. that morning, and he records himself shaving off his hair and eyebrows, and he then writes notes on his wall for the police to find. So obviously I'm putting up little clips here, you can sort of make out what he's writing on the wall. And he then paints his face red and green, and in his mind this is going to make him appear less human. So from what I've gathered, so I watched behind the scenes thing on A Nightmare on Elm Street, and they explain why Freddy Krueger's jumper was red and green. And it's to do with the fact that those two colours, because they're opposites on the colour wheel, it's really difficult for the eyes and the retina to process them when they're together, as red and green obviously cancel each other out. It's the same as when you bleach your hair, and they recommend that you use a purple shampoo, as purple and yellow sort of cancel each other out. And this is the same aspect of red and green. And if you look at the videos at this point, when he's sitting there on the floor, completely shaved, bald, with his face painted like that, he doesn't look human. Really, really scary image. These images are on Google. You, like I said, you can view the footage for yourselves. There are various websites where the footage is uploaded. So he then sits in front of a poster saying "the best of me," and the TV in the background is playing a Bjork music video, and her cover of "I Remember You" it plays in the background. And he then looks up at the sky and shouts, "Fuck the world, fuck Bjork," and states that he isn't depressed. And the song finishes at around 2:52 p.m. He places the gun in his mouth, and what's interesting is I've seen the still of him placing the gun in his mouth. You see in his eyes that he is terrified. I'm not excusing what he's done and what he's talking about, but you see in his eyes he's terrified. But he then does eventually pull the trigger. So the police theorise that he intended to cover the sign note behind him with his blood and brain matter, but the gun that he actually used, it wasn't powerful enough to actually do this. So the footage that was seen by the FBI, they said that after he shoots himself, he sort of falls forward and you hear a little bit of gurgling. And then eventually the camera just cuts off. So Ricardo's body, it lay undiscovered until the 16th of September, and neighbours noticed the smell of rotten flesh, and they noticed that blood was coming under his door. Police entered and discovered Ricardo's body, and the building, they also discovered obviously the final tape that they watched past of that, and they decided obviously that the building needs to be evacuated just to make sure that obviously there were no other explosives on site. So police then watched, like I said, the final tape, and they ended up contacting the FBI and Scotland Yard, and they warned them of the package. So the police, the Metropolitan Police, sorry, they actually managed to intercept it from a South London post office. It had made its way over the Atlantic and ended up in a South London post office, and the police managed to track it down. and it was safely detonated. So, unbeknown to Ricardo, it had a really small chance of Bjork opening the package, as her post was actually vetted through her management office. Um, but also unbeknown to Ricardo, and I don't know if he had found out this news, if his plan would have changed. But a few days before he sent the package, Goldie and Bjork had actually ended their engagement. So Ricardo's body was then given back to his family eventually, and they had him cremated. So they said that they were aware of his obsession, but they maintained that they had no idea whatsoever that he was harbouring dangerous thoughts or of what he was actually capable of. So at one point, his brother said to him, "Go get a real woman. You are obsessed." A psychiatrist who treated him for anxiety also said that he really didn't appear dangerous. So, like I said, obviously Ricardo's videos they were then held for a number of years by the FBI, and they eventually were released to journalists who sadly did leak the material online. I don't think it was really necessary to do that, um, other than maybe a few stills to talk about what was actually involved in the videos, but there was not really any necessary need to leak these videos online, and it's led to a lot of people actually having this footage burnt onto Blu-ray discs and having it in their possession. Um, and like I said, obviously, yeah, you can view the footage if you wish to. Discretionary warning. Like I said, it is really, really uncomfortable viewing. So, September 18th, 1996, Bjork was interviewed outside her London house, and she stated that she was really, really obviously distressed by the whole situation. And she said that I find it very sad that people get into that kind of state. Bjork then went on to send a card of flowers to Ricardo's family, and she then ended up moving to Spain to record the rest of her Homogenic album that was coming out the following year. And she put it down to obviously just tired of the media presence that was surrounding her at that point, and obviously just wanting to escape from that. And a lot of people on many different fandoms, they talk about the fact that Bjork has never been the same with any of her fans ever again. And obviously, after going through that whole experience, you can kind of see why. She also ended up having to hire extra security for her son, Sindri. Like I said, he was about 10 years old at the time. So, about a year later, while she was promoting the Homogenic album, the case was brought up to her again, and she said, "I was very upset that someone died. I couldn't sleep, and I'd be lying if I said it didn't scare the fuck out of me. That I could get hurt, and then most of all, my son could have got hurt." So that's where the story really ends. Obviously, she hasn't really spoke anymore about this case. It has been made into a film, however, a film called The Obsessed, which was released in 2019. And the interesting thing is this isn't the first time that something like this has actually happened. She's not the only person that has actually gone through this who is in the public eye. I have found a couple of other examples, and obviously there are some more really well-known cases. So, just obviously as a side note, in January 2000, Scotland Yard they actually uncovered a kidnap plot against Victoria Beckham and against her son Brooklyn, who was only 2 at the time. However, no arrests were made at this particular point, and 2 months later, she was with the other Spice Girls performing for a Brits performance, and a red laser light actually appeared on Victoria's chest. When obviously this was seen, she was really quickly taken off the stage, and it was assumed that the assassin had got through a fire door, as they found evidence of a fire door being forced open. And in November 2002, 5 people were arrested for another kidnap plot against Victoria. But all of these charges were dropped after one of the witnesses was deemed unreliable. 2011, 2 men were arrested in Devon after they plotted to kidnap and decapitate singer Joss Stone. I don't know if you guys really remember her. She had a really good start to her career, and then she just sort of fizzled out of the limelight. Um, but anyway, I digress. Police found these 2 men in happening to drive to Devon, and they found samurai swords in the men's car that they were planning to use to cut her head off. And Kevin Liverpool, he ended up being given 10 years, 8 months for being what they called the instigator. And Junior Bradshaw was given 18 years for being the foot soldier. And it was believed that the only reason they actually wanted to do this to Joss was because she had a significant relationship with members of the royal family. So both of those sentences, they were then reduced on appeal in 2014, which meant that they were released in 2016 and 2017 respectively. There was Christina Grimmie. She was a really young singer, right at the beginning, the peak of her career. I think she only released like one album. Unfortunately, she was stalked by an obsessive fan by the name of Kevin James Libel. He was 27 years old, and Kevin had reportedly had a hair transplant, he had his teeth whitened, and he went through weight loss in a bid to try and attract Christina. And she ended up having a meet and greet signing at a particular mall in America. And Kevin goes along, and unbeknownst to obviously everyone, he's carrying a firearm. And as Christina stood up to hug him, to say hello, Kevin has shot her 3 times at close range. Her brother and a few others have tackled him to the ground, and he's managed to break free and shot himself and died. And I think the most infamous and the most famous, of these particular cases is probably Mark Chapman. So Mark Chapman was for those of you who don't know or kind of forgotten, an obsessed Beatles fan who held a grudge against John Lennon. He was angry that John had made remarks about the Beatles being bigger than Jesus. He was angry at John's supposed lavish lifestyle. I believe, I couldn't find any proof, but I believe there was rumours circulating that Mark blamed Yoko Ono for the Beatles breaking up. He ended up stalking John to his New York apartment and shot him 5 times on December the 8th, 1980. And Mark was actually sentenced to 20 years to life, but he still remains incarcerated to this day. So I hope you guys found that interesting. It is a little bit of a shorter video than what I'm aiming for, but all in all, it was just something that I think is important to talk about, because we always talk about toxic fandoms, especially I see it quite a lot in. So I follow some other drag artists on Instagram and whatnot, and some of the fans on there can be extremely toxic when it comes to a queen that they like or they don't like. But you also see it in a lot of singers or actors. It becomes a very toxic environment. I just wanted to highlight, obviously, a minority of cases where that toxic behaviour, it leads to something wholly devastating. I want to thank you all for giving me this chance, and I really hope that in some way you enjoyed today's video. And I will see you guys next week for the next case. Please leave a like, share, and subscribe. Please comment your thoughts and feelings. Comment any cases you would like me to talk about, and I will get revising. But take care, guys, and I will see you.